to order and to the Corvallis School Board meeting.
It says it's preparing.
Never mind.
Your meeting for YouTube. Now it's doing.
Now we're on. I would like to call the meeting to order. It's April 16th, Corvallis School Board meeting, and we are here joined by all by Corvallis School Board members, with the exception of Director Therese Jones, who couldn't join us at this time. I would like to welcome you all, and the first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me if you are willing and able to the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, welcome everybody, and I would like to welcome you all to this meeting. And the first item on the agenda is the consolidated action contracts relating to bond construction. As a reminder, the items under this portion of the agenda are for action. Does anyone have a question about anything in the consolidated action? And just as a reminder, since we are using the video conferencing tool, any board member who would like to ask a question or provide a comment or have a motion, please raise your virtual hand through the technology. And for Director Tina Baker, you can let me know over the phone. Vince, go ahead.
I would like to have, just for my edification, the use of bond reserves in the Garfield GMP. Can we have a discussion of that just to confirm my understanding?
Absolutely. Do you have any questions about it, or do you want an explanation about?
I just want to understand, have a full understanding of the use of bond reserves.
Mm-hmm. All right.
It says that it's under budget with the added bond reserve, and I'm just not fully understanding that.
Correct. Ryan?
So I was going to ask either somebody on the bond leadership team to share.
So I'm Kim Patton, Director of Facilities, and I can address that. So as a bond leadership team, we have made a recommendation for deployment of bond reserves. And there is we basically kept in abeyance $15 million of that bond reserves that we have not recommended for allocation at this time. However, we have, based on percentage of the overall project, we've allocated out additional funds to each project to accomplish the work. Because we are finding that the estimates and bids are coming in high. And so we are acknowledging that we need deployment of bond reserves in order to make the projects come to fruition. So this will be the board's first approval of deployment of bond funds. We've recommended it on the bond leadership side, but this is the first official approval of use of bond reserves.
Now, I just want to confirm that this is bond reserve dollars that were allocated for the Garfield project, yes?
Yes. So they're within their recommended allocation.
Great. And are we expecting any additional costs at the Garfield site? Or is this it for our bond work?
So for the bond work, there's still some soft costs that are in the administration portion of our budget, but okay. As far as additional projects, no.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Wonderful. And thank you, Kim, and thank you for introducing yourself at the beginning. As a reminder for everyone, since we have phone-only participants, please introduce yourself at the beginning when you talk, and also for the community as they might be watching on YouTube as well. Perfect. Any other questions? So, seeing no further questions, does anyone wish to make a motion? If you plan to propose a different wording, you may write it and read it aloud.
Consolidated action. Just so you know, that's a motion for both things.
Yeah, and also just as a reminder, we could have a motion for the consolidated action. Vince?
I'd like to move to approve consolidated action.
All right, do I hear a second?
I second it. This is Jay.
All right, so moved by Director Adams and seconded by Director Conroy to approve consolidated action. Any final discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we will take now a roll call vote to record the vote on the motion. So let's start with Director Whitebear,
Yes.
Director Baker,
Aye.
Director Adams,
Aye.
Vice Chair Finger McDonald,
Yes.
and I vote aye. Passes unanimously. And next point on the agenda is, so thank you very much. And thanks for the work on the bond and for the continuing work. We're really excited about the work that you're doing and working every day to make sure that the schools will be ready whenever we can go back. It's really exciting work. Thank you. So with that, I would like to introduce the next point of the agenda is the session 4 training for the Oregon School Boards Association Promise Scholarship Program with OSBA. And I would like to introduce and welcome Kristen Miles from OSBA. Welcome, and the floor is yours. As you may all know, that we have done the board evaluation, and we were going to reflect and discuss the board evaluation, which we do annually, a self-evaluation for the school board. Kristen, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to my home, or a small part of it. Thank you for having me. Kristen Miles, to anybody who's listening and can't see me. Before I begin, you have one new board member that I haven't met yet, and I would hate to enter the conversation without a proper introduction. So I'm Kristen Miles, and I'm with OSBA. And can somebody introduce me to your newest board member?
Absolutely. We have our newest board member is Director LaHoy Whitebear. Would you like to introduce yourself and maybe have a few minutes, a minute introducing what you do and what you're passionate about?
Like what else should I be sharing?
It's up to you.
Okay. My name's LaHoy Whitebear. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm Coastal Band Shumash. I'm a parent and a community member here in Corvallis. I also work for Oregon State University. Clearly that's not my role on this board, but that's what I do professionally. I'm also a PhD candidate in the Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies program at OSU that should be graduating this year. And then things I'm passionate about is ensuring that Indigenous communities are represented and heard, as well as recognized, especially in education in general. I'm also passionate about efforts to help address bullying in the public schools and making sure that the school board is accessible to community members and they understand what we do. So those are some of the things like that are more related to this. I do a lot of advocacy work in the community besides that, but yeah.
Thank you. Really nice to meet you. I've worked with this board for several years now, and so I'm looking forward to working with you as part of it too.
Kristen, I would like to add also, we're really excited to have Lou joining us to the board. During the appointments process, we had so many great people applying, and Lou really shined in her lens of equity and analyzing data. We had a question about analyzing data with SAT scores. Lou was able to highlight some really good information there within a minute or two. And the really great thing that I still remember from that night was saying, and why are we actually testing and measuring people with SAT scores? So really thinking deeply about data and what's behind it is something we're really excited about. And we feel it's a strength of the board, definitely because of Lou.
Great, thank you. And full disclosure, not that you don't already know this, but now my newest coworker is on your board too.
Hi, everybody.
Full criticism tomorrow of my methodology.
Oh no. I'm here learning in 2 channels.
I know, you're here as a board member. It's been fun getting to know Vince better personally. And now, he's the one that I get to pick on if I didn't already. Everybody, first of all, thank you for continuing this work, even in the midst of everything that you are probably struggling, grappling with, and you have on your plate. I know that the last time I say this to all the boards that I'm still working with, the last time we were all together, SIA was the big thing, and everybody had a lot on their plate, and you were already kind of, really busy and sort of maxed out. And who would have known that that this would be the next time, the state of the world the next time we saw each other. So I appreciate you taking time and persevering in this work. And the other thing that I just want to say at the beginning is, we are absolutely going to talk about your board self-eval tonight. I also, those of you that have done this before with me with the old tool, which may only be a couple of you, maybe just Vince. I would love your reflection on this tool as compared to the last one, although Ryan, you were around for that last one too. I also want to just put out there that if there's anything else that we can talk about or do as relates to what you're currently working on, let's do that too. One of the things that OSBA is talking a lot about right now is how can we be of best service to our members? And we don't have a perfect answer to that yet. Some of that is, let's step back. Like, I know that I hesitate every time I reach out to a board where I'm like, hey, just checking on that charter contract or, something like that, because it just feels insignificant right now. So I don't have a perfect answer to that, but I want you to know that we are here to support you. And so if there's something else that you want to weave into this process as we wrap it up, or some other support role that we can play or that I can help with, please let me know. And if it is just like, stay out of our way, I understand that as well. So, okay. Did everybody have a chance to look at the report? Okay, wonderful. I know that you are a board that, you always do your homework. And I would be very surprised if you hadn't all looked at it. We did get all responses. We got everybody to respond, but one person, and I don't know who it is because it's all anonymous. So I won't ask you, but I sent Vince with a message the other night and I was like, how can this happen with this board? So we got all but one answer or one respondent, and that's okay. We have mostly complete data. And as I have said before, although many of you haven't heard me say this before, the results on paper are one thing and the conversation you have with each other is really the most important part. So, so even if you didn't get to fill it out, know that you are welcome in the conversation, and please do join in with that. We could spend many hours, in this whole thing, which we're not going to do, because one of the things that I have learned, if you have not already, is that screen fatigue and web meeting fatigue is real. That's a real thing. And in fact, Vince, in our professional life, and I have been looking into how can OSBA maybe provide more virtual events, especially if we experience any sort of closure at any time. And one of the things that we have discovered in our research too is that, like, it's just so different when you're not in front of somebody, and our attention spans are different. What we're interested in talking about and listening to is different, and our capacities to engage are different and shorter, right? I get exhausted. I don't know about you guys. So we're not going to spend hours and hours, but I do want to highlight some things that that may direct our conversation, and then have you talk to each other mostly. So if you will, I'm going to pull out a couple of things first and then ask you to talk to each other. If you will look at, and you don't have to have this printed, I can also display it on the screen if that would be easier for you. I'm getting yeses. So let me, do I have the option to share my screen? Whoever's hosting will need to give me access to share my screen.
Just 1 second.
No problem.
Oh, sorry. Alternatively, I have it in front of me as well, so I can throw it
Oh,
up.
you could
Say,
share
go
it.
to page whatever, and I can scroll there. And I can
Share your screen, Vince.
share. I have it in front of me.
You have. Okay. Oh, it looks like I have access now.
Awesome.
Kristen, if you want to give it a try.
Thank you both. Thank you, Julie and Sammy. Okay, let's see. Are you seeing what I am seeing? Are you seeing the summary?
Yes, and Kristen, just in case for Tina, who's participating over the phone, probably if we could identify the page and.
The page number? Wonderful, we'll do that. So yeah, so Tina, we are on, I believe it's like page 1. It's the summary of all standards. So the first thing that we'll just take a look at this, and before I tell you what some of the things are that we look for, what stands out to you? What do you notice when you look at this summary page?
And you have Lou and Vince raising their hands.
Okay, Lou, what do you notice?
I noticed that there's kind of a little bit of a split on what people think, but that overall that everybody thinks we're doing a super good job.
Yeah, thank you, Vince.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. The preponderance is, yeah, we're doing really well, or we think we're doing really well. But I mean, the devil's in the details. I mean, this is just self-complimentary. You have to get down into the standards before you really get into the good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Jay, did you have your hand up?
Right.
Sorry, I have 3 things to say. First, Vince, congratulations. I didn't know what the results were, so hooray. Secondly, I am the guilty party. I am the least excuse. I've got nothing else to do except watch student teachers and, oh wait, they're not even doing their thing right now. But if to help with this picture, I think I put total green probably twice, because I don't know any board that's that perfect, but I've had a lot of blues. So if you were gonna try to stereo or get more from my perspective, it would be the board is doing most of the time really good work. The perfect world is not there. So that's my thought.
Great.
Lou and Ryan.
Ryan?
I see a lot of continuity. So I see pretty similar bands between the always and most of the time, and some of the time across each standard. So it doesn't feel like there's a specific standard that we're well advanced in and one that we're struggling in. It's all pretty consistent across the standards.
Thank you. Lou?
That's funny, Jay, that you said that, because like I was gonna disclose that I didn't fill it out, but I also didn't feel that I had enough time on the board where it felt ethical to me to fill it out, because I had only been on the board for like a month and a half or 2 months before asked to evaluate us, and so that felt a little bit off to me. Like it didn't make me feel good, if that makes sense, to fill it out, and it would have been like a skewed perspective. And I kind of feel like that with some of my comments possibly, but I'm not sure. But I'm excited to participate in the comments about it.
Thank you. And I will say that even if you are new, your lens as a new board member is a really critical one and is really beneficial. So thank you, Lou, and I hope that you will be part of the conversation too, because even with just a little bit of experience on the board, that experience that you have coming in, you know, folks that have been on the board for a while don't have that newness about them anymore. I stopped saying old and young board members when I got funny looks about that. So thank you, and I hope you do participate. Look forward to your participation. Anybody else? I'm trying to flip between Sarah? Sarah, you did.
I've got so many screens open now, I can't find the unmute button. So when I was looking at this, you know, I probably was like Jay, where I only put a few greens. And I think a lot of the reason for that was like no board can be perfect all the time. And I also felt like, well, we have our intentions for what we want to do. And then we have the there children yelling in the background, I'm sorry.
It's all real now. This is real. This is what we do. I have a 10-year-old out there who's you're gonna hear.
My 10 and 15-year-old are going at it right now. But I felt like, well, they're the things we intend, like where we intend to be, but I think sometimes we get a little self-congratulatory and because of that, we miss the reality of what we're missing. And so that was sort of what was going through my head as I was filling this out. And I'm gonna mute myself and go close a few doors.
You know, and while just dovetailing on that, while I realized that this looks self-congratulatory, there was no effort to calibrate our responses. So there was no pre-session to say, to really, what does all the time look like? What does part of the time look like? There was no calibration here. This was us authentically reflecting. And I think that we are a fairly critical board. We have high expectations for the district, and I think we have high expectations for ourselves. And if we went down the line and responded, I think that we probably were fairly critical as we responded to this. Nevertheless, we see that pattern that Ryan lifted out, is that there's broad consistency. So that's really exciting to think about.
Yep. And I'm going to say something about that in a minute. Anybody else? I want to make sure that I don't forget about Tina on the phone.
Yeah, since I'm newer, this is my first year. I did actually have to honestly just say I don't know on one of the questions. Yeah. So this was a learning experience for me, just to be able to say, oh yeah, okay, I do know this, and this is how I see it and perceive it. And I really am looking forward to having this discussion tonight.
Great. Anybody else? Did I hear something? Sammy, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think everyone spoke to what I was thinking. There is consistency, and I can see we're highlighting our strengths. And in the words of a former board member, sometimes we want to see the 2% empty or 10% empty side of the cup, and find out how we can fill it up. And I can see the places of improvement. So definitely there's places where we can celebrate the structure, the accountability. We can see really consistency that we're doing well. But there are some points where we're doing really well, like the vision and advocacy and communication. But probably there are some very specific items that we need to discuss and talk about. And I'm really interested in talking about them, whatever we see there as a 1% over 3%. So I know I don't want to lose track of really appreciating and celebrating what we're doing well, and maybe capitalizing on them as we move forward, but also at the same time look into those small reds and say, how can we do better at them?
Thank you. So a couple of things about this. This is a relatively new tool for us, but we've used it a lot in the short time that we've had it. Those of you that did this with me before, or with somebody else from OSBA, I think that's just Ryan and Vince. But this tool is grounded in data, and in fact, it comes out of WASDA, it comes out of our Washington counterpart, and is based on actual research that was done into what are the roles that make a board effective. And if you are high performing in these areas, you will have a positive impact on student achievement. And if you are low performing in these areas, you will have a negative impact on student achievement. And from that came these areas and these indicators. So everything in here is grounded in research, which is one of the reasons why we like this tool so much. And I thought would also appeal to your board that tends to be one of my more sophisticated boards that insists on data as part of your decision making, which is great. So I will tell you, just looking at this page, one of the things that we look for and look at is when you combine, so actually let me back up. Somebody already mentioned this, but part of the, I think it was Vince, part of this conversation is about calibration, right? Like somebody's always, maybe somebody else is most of the time, or somebody's some of the time, maybe somebody else is most of the time. And so part of what we will do, we're not going to change scores at this point, but part of what we'll do is talk about in some of these standout areas, why you felt the way you did, or what caused you to say something. Different members of the board will have different experiences with things. And so you may learn from each other. This is where I see new board members saying like, I don't know that this, that this takes place because I haven't been through a full cycle with the board yet. Or maybe this is something that happens every 2 to 3 years and I haven't experienced that yet. And we'll get to learn from other board members. Sometimes I don't know means I've been around for a long time and I've never seen it happen. So I don't know that we do that, which is different than I haven't been through a full year yet. So part of this conversation is just about that calibration, which is a really good part. I will tell you that one of the things that we look at when we're looking at where does the board feel strongly about its performance in a positive sense is when you combine the green and the blue areas together, the always and the most of the times, do you hit 80% on any of those standards? And you hit them in all. You don't strike me as an overly self-congratulatory board. You, in my experience with you, you are very critical thinkers, right? And you always seek to improve. So you're not a board that I would say is just like, you know what, we're great, everything's great, you can't teach us anything. Like that's not my experience with you. And so I think there's probably a strong indication here that where you think that you're doing pretty well, you're doing pretty well. Not to say that there is not room for improvement, there always is. And one of the things that we recommend that our boards even do is focus on one of your greatest strengths and make a goal to improve that and to keep building on a great strength. So one of the things that I see looking through this is that you hit that 80% green plus blue in every single category. And we will, we'll talk about what shows up as your greatest strength and what shows up as what you interpret as where you need the most work. So the other piece that we look at, and you won't have this in front of you, these are just notes for me, but we look at how congruent you are in your responses. So that consistency, when we have standards that overall have like, some indicator in every color, we wonder what's going on. When we have maybe some people saying all of the time and some people saying none of the time, and that's every standard or the majority of them, or there's a number of people like I've seen some of these split 5 ways equally, don't know, never, some of the time, most of the time, all of the time. And that's an interesting conversation usually because it's, what does I don't know mean? What does never mean? What does always mean? I mean, we think we know what those things mean, but we look at how, whether you feel like you're doing well or not, how much is the board on the same page? And so by and large, you are mostly on the same page. As these things go, you are really on the same page. So what I want to point out is we do a little bit of, it's not sophisticated statistical analysis, but we look at the frequency of each kind of answer in each standard. And so, I'll give you a couple of data points and then we'll go through them. So I'm just trying to think what the easiest thing to do here is as far as what we need to split up. Let me say this, where you are most congruent is standard 4. The accountability standard. So that's where all of the indicators where you're mostly on the same page as far as how you feel like you're doing. Where you are least congruent is in vision, the second standard. So that's interesting. Also, where you have the highest overall average score is in accountability. That's standard 4. And where you have the lowest overall average score, and only one of these sort of hits our cutoff for being technically low, one of the benchmarks in there, is standard 3, particularly 3D, structure. And we'll talk about that particular indicator. What's interesting about that is, again, we collect anecdotal evidence as we go around the state and do this. In my experience, having facilitated probably 20 of these or so by now, standard 4 usually gets everybody's lowest score. That's the hard one. Accountability is hard. You have to be monitoring, right? Most boards don't monitor yet. And so a lot of the work that we do is in teaching them how to follow up, monitor, hold systems accountable, and hold their superintendents accountable in an appropriate way. And many boards don't do that. So, so I've only seen one other board where accountability comes in as the highest piece. So that tells me something about your board. Any questions or comments up to this point? We're going to get into the actual report. Vince, you seemed surprised about something a minute ago.
No, I was trying to keep up with notes. So what were the highs and the lows?
Yeah.
So I got the greatest congruence and lowest congruence, and then
The overall averages then.
Yeah.
The highest overall average was in accountability, standard 4. And the lowest was in structure. And when we get to, that's standard 3. When we get to the one that, I mean, you'll see as we go through the report, you know, that'll become clear. But I also have page numbers so that we can flip through rather easily and Tina can tell where we are. Okay. So digging into the report a little bit, like I said, I'm gonna point out some of the things that I noticed that are high points, either because you were pretty divergent in your answers or because you were pretty low scoring or high scoring in your answers. Again, you can take this conversation and have it again and do with it what you will, but I wanna make sure that at least we point out some of those big picture things. So I'm gonna flip to page 11. And we're gonna look at question 26. This is this the one that was the greatest in, yeah, this individual question here. So this indicator under the benchmark had the greatest, obviously, incongruence, right? There were everything from never to some of the time to most of the time to always. And so this one is about communicating your rationale for your decisions to the community. And I wonder if you want to talk about why you answered, how you answered. And the other thing I'll just say before I toss it back to you is sometimes it's about how the question is written and the words in the question, right? What does communicate mean? Like, do we have different interpretations of what it means to communicate, and also who's the community? So I will toss that out there and you can discuss why you think what you think on this one.
You have 2 hands raised, Sarah and Jay.
I think I was.
I'll just let you know, I can't see hands raised. If you're clicking something, I don't see those. So if you want to like raise your physical hand, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, and Kristen, probably if you click on participants, maybe you'll be able to see them. I'm not sure. Yes? Awesome.
So I think I was one of the yellows on this. And it was largely because this was one of those ones where I think our intention and what actually gets out to the community or is absorbed by the community are not necessarily in alignment. I think our intention is to tell the community what we're doing and why, but I don't think they always get it or they always are paying attention. And it's one of those categories that I think we need to work on, but I'm not quite sure how it needs to be done.
Jay?
For me, it would be an area that we might just reach some agreement on, maybe a protocol or an expectation that when we make decisions, either through the board chair reminding us that we owe it to the community to give them a good, clear picture of a rationale, and the board chair would be comfortable, wait, we haven't done that, or we have done that. And I think another comment that I would make on this is that we know, I think we've all learned that we would be there till midnight if we all talked and explained every decision. So caution, caution. But I think you have to compromise that or move that to a point of saying, yes, but have we reached this goal of communicating to the community? And again, I would push back to the board chair to say, what do you think? Keep us mindful of it. My last comment is I think that when you have a strong superintendent, she does a great job of making us explain our decisions, our rationale. So Ryan did a great job tonight of kind of holding up the mirror and saying, what is it you are saying, and be clear. So I think there's a combination of factors. I think we're doing fine, not perfect, and we can remind ourselves how to do this better.
Sammy?
Do you want me to give it to Ryan first, and I'll go next? You want to go?
One of the things I noticed about that specific question was that the spread was pretty consistent, 2, 2, 2, and 1. And so one of the things I wondered about was that a couple of board members feel like they are doing a good job in that, and some people think they're doing okay and maybe not so good. So I'm just wondering about how, as you look at that, are there things that some board members have in terms of a communication forum or a group of stakeholders that they're talking to more frequently? Are there channels that are established for a couple of our board members that help to get communication out? And are there things that we could learn from that would help other board members in that communication piece? So because it is so segmented, that I think there's some learning that can happen just in the conversation.
And I'm so glad, Ryan, you mentioned that. I believe my vote or my choice here was somewhere between the yellow or the blue, probably blue. And I would say this is really representative of if we do a polling of the community from the anecdotal. I would see probably if we ask 7 random people, they might tell us the same thing. If someone is tuned in to our Facebook page and they read the packets and they see the cover page of what the staff is asking us to do, and probably follow up with the meeting minutes and see what the board members said when they voted, probably people will be like, yes, you're communicating all the time and you're saying what's the rationale. But the fact of the matter is, depending on the topic, I'm seeing and I'm observing some people wants to see the information presented and reiterated in different mediums. And probably that's one of the things that maybe we can do better at, even though we're communicating over social media, over the website, at least for our guiding principles and policies and resolutions. And we have really good transparency in what we're doing, but not necessarily how it's being perceived or received by some community members at the right time and the right medium that the constituents want. And I would really recall a couple of anecdotes probably within the last year when we have voted on issues that maybe the community is not agreeing on, like the community is interested in knowing about them. We might have had times where we would share it through our website and through our statements during the board. And if there is a consensus within the whole board, I would be reiterating it as the board chair to speak on behalf of the board position. Still, I can see some people say, I did not hear that before, or this is the first time I hear it, or you did not say that to me. And I think that's a really critical thing that we need to examine. What's the best medium for each topic and each group of constituency?
Let's see. Lou?
I just want to make sure I pulled the right page. Are you on page 11? Because I can't see it on the shared screen.
Yes, I'm on page 11.
Oh, okay, cool. I thought that was the one you were on, based on the conversations that we've been having. I think that this is an area that I would have rated as probably in the yellow, just because when we think of stakeholders, what comes to mind is like whose voices are consistently heard and whose are consistently left out of these conversations. And by not including more people's voices in the development and revising and communicating the rationale out, or who's hearing it is what comes to my mind, and who has access to the board. The meetings I've been at have been very clear that it has been a lot of families maybe being left out of it from diverse backgrounds and possibly other socioeconomic backgrounds. So those are some of the things that come to mind with me is we may be consistent with some parts of the population, but we're also leaving out some populations as well. And that may not have had any conversations with the board whatsoever, or even know where to look. And when we rely on social media heavily, I think is a great way to get the communication out there. But how do we engage people that do follow the district page more so they actually see the information? Because I know like if you don't interact with a post on a social media page, it stops showing up on your feed, on Facebook in particular. And so we may think we're getting the information out there on Facebook, but if somebody hasn't interacted with our page for a little bit, they don't ever see it. And they would have to actively go onto the page to see what the updates are. And so those are just my thoughts around that part.
Thank you. Vince?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of rationale, I'm really thinking about the why we do things. And I think over the last year, the last 2 years, the reason that the board has been taking specific actions is because we've already done our homework. With pretty much everything we do, everything that the district does is aligned to the strategic plan. And I think this is a place where I think a theory of action is really, really important because it really gets to that why. You know, why do we have these goals? Why do they matter? Why do we think that they're going to change outcomes for kiddos? And I think that that really speaks to this. So when I first got on the board, there was no strategic plan. They didn't have a plan. And the board spent a lot of time talking in session and just doing this, exploring the why to take a particular action. I remember when we were doing One to World, our one-to-one with device, implementation and thinking about that and going and processing that. There was a lot of board time that was spent just talking about why the heck should we even be considering this. So I think that, while we look at this in a critical way, I think it's largely because we've sorted out for ourselves what the why is. We know what it is, what we want to do, and that's in the strategic plan. I think what we need to do is do our homework and do that theory of action, and so we can share that with the public so they can see what is the theoretical underpinnings for why we have this strategic plan.
Thank you. Sarah?
And I think sort of following on a little bit with what Vince said, our rationale and our reason for doing things that needs to be communicated to the public isn't necessarily the rationale that every board member processes through during a meeting. I mean, I think sometimes this board, frankly, does too much verbal thinking in meetings, and we end up sometimes saying things that are part of our thinking process that are not where we ended up. So there may be some confusion created by that, but I also think that's not what our community needs to hear. Our community needs to hear the board made this decision because we have these goals and this you've established, I'm losing my words, but our established goals, our established direction that we want the school district to go in. And so that the message that goes out to the community doesn't need to necessarily be all these little individual discussions. It needs to be at the meeting, the board considered this, and it falls under goal 2 and fits with our, emphasis on health and wellness or whatever. And so it was, decided that this program would go forward, or that this program wasn't meeting the goals, and so it's been eliminated, or whatever the communication is. And that's very different from communicating what is exactly happening in every board meeting. I don't think most of the community wants to know all of those details. And I think there's also a problem in our community, and it's probably not at all unusual, in understanding what the role of the school board is. We're up here making policy decisions and budget decisions. We're not deciding what goes on in your kids' classrooms. And so I think the sort of what we're doing gets lost in this misunderstanding sometimes also.
We've got one more and then we'll move on. I think that will come up later too, Sarah. I think there was one that asked specifically about the roles, responsibilities of the school board. And I think that stands out as something that I was gonna bring up to you as well. Vince.
Yeah, just to ground what Sarah was saying is that, so equity is a core value for this board and for the district, but we don't have any documents that discuss why that is, why that's important to us, and why that's important to our community. So, in that, we make decisions. There are substantive decisions that are made. There's going to be, and we will continue to make really substantive resource allocation decisions based on equity, but we don't have any discussion as to why that's important to us. And I think it's a really good example of a deficit that we have there.
Thank you. And I think you'll see as we go through this, some of these things will knit together, and you will probably come up with something at the end of this that you want to do with this that you're like, oh, there are a couple of themes here. Okay. So next we're going to go to, I think it's page 17. Right, it is page 17. And I just wanted to point out question 42, because there were very few I don't knows on this. And I know, Lou, you said that you put an I don't know at one point because you've been on the board for just a minute. But I also just wanted to see if there was anything that you wanted to discuss here. The other thing I know about this, this self-evaluation is that not all indicators pertain equally to all boards. And so, so some things may have a greater weight than others. Some things may have a greater weight in certain years than in other years. I just wanted to check in on 42 and see if you wanted to talk about that, whether it's you wanted to reassure that you know what the plan is, or talk about the difference between that some of the time and all of the time piece. Again, I don't see this as a super standout one, but let me give you an opportunity. Sammy, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I want to speak to this one. I'm not sure if what I answered honestly, but I remember very clearly I went to our policies about technology, and I asked myself, first of all, is that our role, that we have to have a process in place to evaluate and update technology? I'm not sure about that answer, but I can't remember finding a policy specifically that speaks to updating or upgrading technology per se. There are some policies there that speaks about the use of technology and what's allowed, what's prohibited, and how to deal about it within educational or instructional technology, use of technology for staff and students. So that's where I'm actually wondering about the purpose of the question as well.
Jay, you had something you want to say? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
this is an example for me of questions that I wasn't clear should be board level work or superintendent level work. Because there's a lot of really good things for the superintendent to be thinking about. And there's only 12 months worth of meetings, or maybe you do it on a 2-year rotation of how you evaluate tech and update technology. So to me, I would have spun this back to you or other people who deal with a lot of great boards. How do they do this, except for maybe saying they create a policy that says ad hoc, we will, or the superintendent shall review and evaluate technology and report once every 2 years on its value and alignment with strategic planning. Because we don't have I don't think we should be micro involved, but it's a good thing to be involved. And so it highlights for me a lot of questions that you raise in this survey that tell me, where should the board really be, and might it just best be about creating a goal or policy that asks the superintendent through his team to do something rather than we do it. No, he brings it to you and then we stamp it or raise questions.
That's an excellent point, Jay. And as you know, I will never be in favor of micromanagement. In the case of this kind of question, I would just, to contextualize it, I would ask you to think of the opposite. If the board had no idea about the technological infrastructure in place in your district, what would that look like? My guess is that you probably discuss these things as broad strokes as part of your budgeting and probably as part of your facilities discussions, frankly. When you're talking about, updating facilities or the needs or, 21st century learning, et cetera. I mean, there's probably something that's woven in here. And I imagine you do that well enough to where it doesn't seem like a call out necessarily, unless it is at some points where it's like, you know what, we've got to completely revamp X, Y, Z. And so, you imagine the opposite of the board not knowing or not being involved in any of those discussions. And you can probably picture why something like this is good to have your finger on, but you're right in that this isn't your job to do that review necessarily. It's your job to ensure that the superintendent is considering these kinds of things when he's making recommendations to you. And so like, if you went out for a bond and you were going to build a new high school, the technological infrastructure of that school would be a key point, right? But I also want Ryan to weigh in on this if you want, or anybody else, because I don't know the specifics in your district, but that's just sort of in general. I think
could I add one more point that I think helps? It would be another example would be the safety of our schools, the safe environment of our schools. It's again, something that, is that something, just your question, should we mandate that the superintendent tells us he has a program and does it, or and then every 2 or 3 years we get details, and what's the right board role? So another good example in my mind.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you said sort of near the beginning, Kristen, about the way the question is asked. And I think that maybe the way you described it just a minute ago, that might be a good, sort of narrative down at the bottom or something, because I felt the same way. I felt that way on this question. And I also felt that way on number 45, which is on the next page. And that's about district operations to ensure there's an efficient and effective learning environment. I know that there's policy around teacher evaluation systems and identifying those. And I know that, the kind of that work happened about 7 or 8 years ago across the state. And so I think there's things that are in place around each of those that are policy, but the way these questions are written make it feel like it's more operational. And so when you said at the beginning that standard 3 was one that is probably lower for us, for me, it does in some ways go back to the way the questions were written and where is the line between operational and policy. And I think that that's the piece that how you described it, I probably would have answered it a little bit differently. I think the board knows that we've had sort of one-to-one devices where, and right now it's become really important. And had we not had those, there'd be lots of conversation right now about technology and access to technology. But because it's something we do and something we know we have, then it's just something we deploy, and then we work out some of the glitches as we went through the access points. But I think that's again, there's a policy component of it, and then the operational side of it. And again, I was answering more on the operational.
Totally fair. And I think one of the challenges that we face in using this tool is that it's proprietary and we can't change it. So because we bought it right from WASDA. But as we get feedback from our own boards, you know, we want this feedback, but we are looking at, I don't know that this is necessarily, this wording doesn't necessarily work in Oregon or with our boards. There are some questions, while I really like this instrument, there are some questions in there that refer to policy when we're like, are you sure you don't mean practice? Because like the board doesn't need a policy for everything, you know? And so that might be part of this calibration, is that, which is why, Jay, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad that, you know, we got to describe that. The challenges in changing it, I wish we could, but we are also looking at, we had a meeting with WASDA recently to say, would you mind if we like, you know, messed around with these questions a little bit, because not all of them work for us. So when you hit those questions and you feel like that, you know, give me that feedback and I'll take that back too. Vince?
Yeah, I think this is more of a local, well, maybe it's not. And so, I mean, the Corvallis School District has some history with technology implementation, and it can be a thorny issue in Corvallis. And I think it probably can be in the States and most of the developed world, you know, with issues around screen time. It's kind of settled down lately. The other aspect, so controversial issues or issues that are controversial in the community are ones that the board should keep, you know, reasonably close at hand. So I think that's one aspect that would recommend this as being board work or something the board should pay attention to. The other is that technology and mobile technology in the classroom is expensive. And so those big ticket items, just from a fiscal oversight standpoint, is one of those things that the board is going to have to at least pay some attention to. But while, you know, deferring that, you know, the technical aspects to it to staff.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else on that one, I was going to move us to page 18, which actually Ryan just called this one out, question 45, because this is the other area where we had a little bit of that spread. And so I want to make sure that you all had a chance to check in with each other about that. So it's provide for evaluation of district operations to ensure there's an efficient and effective learning environment. So, and I can totally see where this is another one of those, is this an operational question? What is the board's level of involvement here? So we had a couple of I don't knows, a couple of some of the times, and a couple of most of the times. So again, to the extent that you want to discuss this, let's do. Let's see, Sarah, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, this felt like something that wasn't in my lane. And it also felt like something that would be really hard for the board to evaluate, because what an efficient and effective learning environment is, to me, is something that would change classroom to classroom, depending on, you know, what the needs of the students that are in that room are. So it seemed like an odd thing for us to be evaluating ourselves on.
Yes, and just to be the counterpoint to that, and I hear where you're coming from on this, I think also imagine the opposite again. Like if you had no idea if your schools were effective and efficient learning environments, what would that look like? So there's probably, you know, something embedded in your system to where you could speak confidently that your schools are effective for students in general. But yes, I do think this is another one of those that if we had our druthers, we would either remove or reword in some way. Lou? You're muted.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I was just gonna agree with Sarah on this point about how that efficient and affecting learning environment, it feels like would vary so much. Like, how do you evaluate that as a district? And I think because of the demographics of the district too, that there's people who are always getting left out of any kind of reporting anyhow. And so like, how do we know if what's effective for certain populations is effective for students that are struggling too? And it's really hard to evaluate that, right? And so that's where mine was. The only thing I would have about it is that because people do because people aren't clear on what they should bring to the school board, the number of operations questions that come in or emails that come in could be also another way that we're thinking about answering this question. So like, we all receive emails often, and a lot of times they're operations questions. And so I don't know if other folk on the board thought about that when doing this part of the evaluation, but I think that's one way we can kind of gauge it too based on the responses to us.
Thank you. Sammy?
Yeah, I would concur with both Sarah and Lou. If someone asked me in the supermarkets the same question, and they tell me you have only always, most of the time, all the way to never or don't know, what's your answer? Here's how I will answer it. I'll say, well, the school board, the way that I understand it, we are responsible on the big why. So why we do business and what are we doing in terms of the why. And that's translated very clearly in our school board strategic goals. And also the what, which is the strategies and the definition of our goal. Now, that could translate also to metrics that the superintendent develops and communicate to us that he's achieving and his team is achieving the outcomes that speaks to effective learning environments, efficient learning environments, and good operations. But all these things should translate into either a narrative or a survey outcomes or metrics that we can measure that's equitable, of course, and inclusive. But eventually, what we need to ensure is that the policies are speaking to the why and the what, not the how. And that's where I would definitely politely pivot from this question and say, this is operations, and we can't really provide for the evaluation of operations. And to give a good example why that is really important for us not to put our hands into, think about what we're doing right now. Distance learning for all is a very strong steering of the ship that our staff managed to do within a few, they immediately started planning within the same day of the knowing that this is going to be a possibility. And within a few weeks, they're ready to hit the road running with that. And just imagine if we had the detailed policies of how we're going to evaluate how you do things. You can't be flexible as an institution with different needs and demands, such as needing to provide for efficient and effective learning environments through distance learning for all, where our parents are teaching from their homes to our kiddos at their own homes. So yeah, that's my take on this question.
I love your term politely pivot. I am not nearly nice enough to ever use it, but I love it so much. And I think, and just to piggyback on what you just said, Sammy, I think, I mean, yes, you're all very thoughtful about this. And I think that the way you evaluate this is through evaluation of your superintendent, right? I mean, like, you're not evaluating district operations, you're evaluating your superintendent who runs the district. And so if I could change this question, I would put it in the superintendent evaluation part. So, and I think, so I think you're doing this already. Okay, I'm gonna bring us back. So the one other thing I wanted to point out on this is one of only 2 questions in this whole thing that doesn't have any green in it. And I think that was mostly about the nature of the question, frankly. So I'm going to flip us back to page 16, and we'll just for a moment, again, this wasn't one of the big standout ones, but if we could look at question 40 for a moment. Have a process that includes community and parent involvement in selecting curriculum. So this had a number of yellows in it. We had 3 some of the times, 2 most of the time, and 2 always. So I wonder, again, sometimes the nature of this question is, well, what is community and parent involvement in selecting curriculum? And I don't know how you do it in your district. You know, in the district that I was an administrator in for 10 years, we had a committee of folks that made a recommendation, parents were on it, they brought it to the board, et cetera. But I just kind of wondered about the number of about a little bit of the divergence here. So I don't know if you want to spend just a minute discussing this, if this rises to the level of a bigger discussion or not. Sarah.
Yeah, I think I'm probably one of the yellows, and it's largely because this is one where I went and looked at the policy while I was answering the questions. Sammy mentioned doing that earlier, and I think I'd done it on the question he talked about.
You're the only board that's ever going to do that. I love you guys.
And it's there, but I feel like when we're seeing presentations about curriculum, it's often from the staff who've done this sort of test drive in their classrooms or whatever. And I think there's parent involvement, but maybe the board doesn't always hear about it.
Okay. Jay?
I would have been a yellow on this, one of the few yellows that I would have put on, because I don't remember hearing parent involvement, and I would say that it may be overrated, because you get the wrong parents on a curriculum committee and it's a disaster. So I don't have total faith that parents are the perfect people to have on curriculum committees, but I've not heard us say much about parent involvement. So I put maybe some of the time. Sorry.
Sammy?
Tina would like to say something.
So I don't actually remember what I put. I'm pretty sure I actually said some of the time. And let me speak to that. I think I put some of the time because it's best left up to the research, the staff, the teachers, the administration and superintendents to come forth with the curriculum that works best for the district, because they know what works in the classroom with the kids. I know they have a vision in mind for equity and inclusion. And so when it comes down to curriculum, if we wanted parent input, I think that would just be more of like suggestions at that point, because like I said, to go back to research and best practices is best left up to the people who are actually implementing this curriculum. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you.
So if I may add also, I think we do have policy IF, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure within policy IF curriculum development or through some other means, something I remember that we do frequently is we have the curriculum outside for the community to examine, and the community members are invited to examine them and look at them. Again, for this question, it reminds me of the first time I ever learned about school boards. It was through Richard Feynman memoir. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman, and his story, he talks about having stacks of curriculum books, and he goes by them one by one, and the board will discuss lessons plans. And we don't do that. We have people who know how to do this best. It's not the school board, and we have the means for the community to inspect it. But through the policy, we really may. I think that that's how it works here. Is through the policy, we operationalize it, and the superintendent gets to approve it through policy decision, right?
Ryan?
So yeah, a couple things just to add to this one. I think that there is a process that includes the opportunity for curriculum review. At the same time, there are also areas of curriculum that I think require greater community input and parent input than others. And an example of one that we've been doing right now is social studies. And we've even had a couple of board members come and share their racial or cultural perspective and how that shows up or doesn't show up in materials, or historically has shown up or hasn't shown up in materials. And so that's been a really important area to have the conversation as a committee continues to have that lens as they're making decisions. Other times that may not be quite the case. With our health adoption that we did recently, we had shared that with community that comes together to work on things like nutrition and student health. And so I think what we've tried to do has been to take the opportunity to those that are most invested in that decision based on their perspective, or that's something that really speaks to them, as well as have that viewing. I think by the end of the process, it feels like it's mostly just about that viewing, because all those things have sort of led up to where we're at right now when we bring one material option forward. So I think what it says to me is that as we share those adoptions, we probably we'll have one this year in social studies, but we may not have one for a while based on where we are with the economy. But as we do that this year, I think it's important that we highlight some of those pieces and perspectives that were brought into the decision. So this conversation has been helpful for me, honestly, around this question, because it just reminds me of some of the things we need to make sure we're sharing as we bring curriculums forward in the future.
Oops, sorry. Before I go to Lou, I read that book in college, Sammy, as part of my psych degree. Lou?
Rest.
For this, what number on this one are we looking at? Are we looking at the whole page, or?
We were looking at 40.
40, okay, that's what one I thought we were on. I just wanted to double check. I think that there's definitely some work to do on that effort, on these efforts. The curriculum is very inequitable. Who has access to reviewing curriculum? Again, like my other comments, like, is it the same group of parents and community that are having access to be able to know how to provide input? And my comment about the curriculum is it has lots of biases in it that have been historically part of K-12 curriculum. And I know teachers are making some strides in those areas, but there's still a long ways to go. And the number of microaggressions that Indigenous and students of color and other marginalized groups are experiencing because of curriculum, I don't think can be overlooked. And this is an opportunity to have conversations with communities that are directly impacted in understanding like the role that curriculum has in helping break stereotypes and help all students succeed a lot better, instead of leaving students who are demographically smaller in the district kind of behind in those efforts. And so I think like there is a lot of work, and I know there is a group that meets that I think is great, that's doing some amazing work, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that continues to grow and how we can get those parent and community inputs a little bit more into the curriculum, because I think a lot of people just don't know how to provide input. And so being able to reach community, I think in some of these regards is really important, like Ryan was talking about, especially in social studies, because that has always been from a very specific lens, and not much has changed over several lifetimes on whose perspective is centered and whose truth is centered as true histories and stuff. So I think there are some efforts being made, but there's still a lot that can be done to involve community and parents in that.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, Vince?
Yeah, just having been on the board for a little while, it's one of the things that curriculum adoption is one of the things I've really appreciated about the Corvallis School District and their approach, that it's evidence-based, that it comes from staff, and it's kind of this comes from bottom up instead of top down approach. That, sometimes we see that in other states, or maybe even in Oregon, where the school board literally is going out shopping curriculum and implementing it. We've heard horror stories about that. We have none of that here. And, to Lou's point, just this year, it may be a surprise that the district has taken up an equity lens, document, or as a way to interrogate processes. So I'm really hopeful for what curriculum adoption will look like in the coming years and how that's going to change. And I'm sure that that's being implemented in the social studies adoption. So I just really appreciate the way the district goes about bringing curriculum forward to the board, and the process is very smooth. It's easy to process, it's transparent, and it's easy for us as a school board member to see what options were considered and how they were weighed and why staff is recommending the curriculum that they are when we adopt.
Thank you. Does anybody need a stretch break? Like a minute or two, just to, just like get energized again. I want to bring something up on my screen and I need to like switch for a second. So can we take just like 1 minute to move around and everything, and we'll be right back?
Absolutely. Let's take 2 minutes.
That's up to Sammy.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
That's it. Okay. All right. So let's take a few minutes.
Are we all back?
Okay.
Sammy, are you muted?
Now I am not. So I just unmuted myself. So I just checked in with Tina and she's back. Do we have everyone else back? Wonderful.
Okay. Should we go ahead and continue?
Yes, let's go ahead.
Okay. So I wanted to point out quickly, although not too quickly, because it's really important to celebrate your successes and the things that you do well. I wanted to go to page 22, and we don't have to debrief any of these, but I wanted to show you how excellent this particular benchmark showed up. It's really important to acknowledge the things that you feel like you do well. And like I said, you're not an overly self-congratulatory board. In my experience, I'm not at every board meeting, but the fact that like all of you said that, you know, you regularly evaluate the superintendents, you communicate this, not that you have more than one, the superintendent's performance and communicate that to the community, that there are written goals, that you base decisions on the superintendent's contract on evaluations. You may or may not be surprised that those are not automatic structures that are in place in every district. We do a lot of work with boards to get those structures in place, but it's not an area that always gets a lot of really high marks from a board. And so, so I just want you to acknowledge and feel good about acknowledging that this is an area of strength that you pointed out for yourself. It's that relationship between you and your superintendent is so key. And part of that is having a fair and transparent and, you know, a good evaluation system that is both for accountability, but also for support, right? That is one of the key features of a good evaluation system, is that it's supportive in nature too. And so I don't know if anybody wanted to say anything about this. Right, let me look at participants again. But it as part of all of this, it's really important not just to be like, what can we do better all the time, which is fair. It's a big part of it, but celebrating what you do well is a big part of it too. So I don't know if anybody had anything to say. I'll leave it open for a second if you do.
Brian is awesome.
I was just going to say, thanks for evaluating me. No, I think that it goes back to those board goals that were established and connecting metrics to those and me being able to report out on it. I think for me, it's clear. There's not really a lot of ambiguity about how I'm going to share with you my progress and performance. And so I honestly think it's a structure that's helpful because I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what am I missing or what am I going to be evaluated on that I don't know about. It's pretty clear, and actually it's really clear. So you know, I said that sort of tongue in cheek, but really it helps to have clarity around that. And for a superintendent not to have that clarity, you spend time thinking about trying to figure that out rather than focusing on supporting staff and teaching and learning. So I appreciate it.
Great.
One thing I would like to add as well to this is that I really appreciate Ryan's clarity around when we would expect metrics at what stage in the year and where the numbers are reported. So there's really clarity on expectation when we're going to expect what, and it gives us a really good clarity on how we're receiving the information and when. And when community members are asking us about graduation rates or any of these information, we know when to tell them to, like in January, we'll give you this information. In March, we'll have this pieces of information, which is really helpful for us both ways to provide the evaluation for Ryan, but also when we communicate with the community as well about the performance of the district.
Good point. This is not, I mean, evaluation is not just something you do to check a box, right? I mean, again, it's both as a continuous improvement thing. It's part of that, you know, setting goals and checking in on them, the overall health of the district, and continuing to build that strong relationship and support that you have for your superintendent. So, so this is a really good area to have strength in, because that relationship is foundational. Okay, great. So let's go on into standard 5. I want to go to page 24. And I just wanted to point out again, you know, some of these, sometimes I see like tons of red all over the place. So that the things that I'm pointing out to you are not, they're not overwhelmingly negative, but in context, this was the other question that got no green. And I just noticed, because there's nothing wrong with most of the time. Of course, not every question gets all green. In the context of how you scored yourself, this particular question was a little bit lower. And so we have most of the time, and then we had a few some of the times. And given the conversation that we're having tonight, this question 63 sticks out to me as something that I think that you as a board probably continue to discuss and want to discuss. And that, you know, modeling cultural, racial, and ethnic understanding and sensitivity is really key to the work that you do as a board, and that you and that you are putting that out there in the community, that it is important for you to do it as a board. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, and that you can share with each other. How does the board do this? In what capacity? And where would you like to grow in this area? And Sarah has her hand up.
So this was one that I sort of scored lower, because I felt like it was something that I worry about us sort of congratulating ourselves on, like, oh, we try to be so, you know, sensitive, and I worry that if we sort of get into that mode, that we will stop learning and just pat ourselves on the back and not keeping, you know, we need to do the work to see where we're missing things and what we're not seeing and who we're not hearing from. And so I think this is one that I will probably always score low, because I don't want us to assume we've gotten there. I mean, I am from the white culture and I miss things, and I need to be aware of that and keep working on it.
Thank you. I think Sammy, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I would say I would concur. There's a lot we need to do to model it optimally. One of the things personally I did, and I know several board members did as well, is attending Beyond Diversity training. And I can't remember the percentage, but lots of our staff and actually staff from partner organizations from the county and other school districts are attending Beyond Diversity training. And attending Beyond Diversity training was really an eye opener for me. And I think there's a lot for me to learn from there. That's there's work to be done. We're focusing on equity and we're doing our work. There are things that are under our control to model cultural and racial and ethnic understanding and sensitivity. And to be really honest, there are some things that are not completely under our control, maybe are under our influence. I hear from community members and constituents being frustrated with the way we treat disaggregating data based on the categorization that is provided by the federal government. So our Middle Eastern constituents, those who are either categorized as white or Asian, where you have to disaggregate the data in more in depth to understand different communities and a better understanding. Some of these things are harder to measure through standard systems, and some of the disaggregated data comes to us that way because of that. And I understand our staff are doing their due diligence to really address that inherent challenge. And we're listening to our community members, not only through the lens of the disaggregated data categories we get from ODE and from the federal government. But I think there is more work for us to do to address those frustrations and those question marks. Our work with community partners, like the continued conversations with board members with NAACP, and I know Ryan meets with the president of the NAACP frequently. All of these things are very important for us to continue to model this sensitivity and to really understand the needs of our communities of color and students of color. So I think we're doing some things good, but there's more work to be done. Honestly, it takes a village. It's not only the capacity of the school board, but there is some work of the school board to do in terms of advocating and influencing as well.
Thank you.
I would like to say something.
Oh, Tina?
Tina. Go ahead.
So I don't remember what I marked, but it would probably be 2 if I remember right. Not sure, maybe 3. But I think in order for us to look at it, an honest look at ourselves as a board and how we are able to serve the district and the families in our district, we can't be complacent in thinking and congratulating ourselves when we have a lot of work to do on our implicit biases, and to continue to work on our implicit biases and in our cultural, racial, and ethnic understanding and sensitivity to our marginalized populations. We can't just leave it at the diversity development. We have to continue to do this work in order to serve our families. And that just means to look at ourselves critically and just be okay with saying, oh, wow, okay, I have a lot to learn. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lou?
I was just gonna say that I do appreciate the board's willingness to want to learn and to recognize that we do have a lot of work to do in this. And I know when I first joined the school board, when you all chose me or selected me through the interviews, the reporter afterwards came up to me and asked if how I viewed some of the comments and if I thought that I was selected solely because I'm Indigenous. And I told her that I think that it was more that the board appreciated the critical lens that I would bring and the perspective that I would bring. And I didn't view everybody as just choosing me because I'm Indigenous, or some people would consider me a person of color. And I didn't view that as what the board was doing. And I appreciated how I was able to answer that from a place of honesty based on the short conversations I had with everybody. So I think that, and I remember Vince saying something about we need to not just sit in these seats in a comfortable space. Like, we need to feel uncomfortable through some of our conversations. And so to me, that really highlighted the way that the board models this, but there is still a lot of work to do. Of course, everybody has work to do. If we think we've ever reached that place, we need to reevaluate that. But I do think that we do have at least the desire to get there.
Thank you. And Vince?
Yeah, I'll echo the same sentiment. I don't think that we'll ever, at least in the time that I'm going to be on the board, that we're ever going to score ourselves very high in this area. That said, I think that in the past couple of years, the board has not invested enough time and effort into developing our own skills and our own personal growth, because doing this work is a personal experience. And I think that we need to redouble our efforts in that space, in changing ourselves from a consciousness standpoint. The other is that I would really appreciate seeing the board focusing here in developing systems that break down unconscious oppression that we know that is going on just by virtue of the way that we do business. You know, I mentioned just a little while ago that the district took up an equity lens, which, you know, is a fairly basic and it has been a long-standing tool that's been available to us for a while. And I would love to see the board implementing that or figuring out ways how to implement that methodology of interrogating our decision-making to ensure that it is inclusive and as equitable as possible. So I see this in two channels. One is in changing our own consciousness and the other is in developing systems. I'm reminded of the keynote from OSBA convention last year, Dr. Marks, and his example of a police officer, you know, making a decision whether he was going to issue a citation before he ever got out of the car, before he ever knew the identity of a person. So how can we develop, you know, just really basic system changes like that that can ensure that we're treating every child, you know, without having a biased lens in front and ensuring that we can't predict the success of each kiddo.
Thank you. Lou, did you have your hand up again, or is that from?
I had it up again. Thank you. I had to, my small child needed help with ketchup, so the reality of our lives right now.
That's right.
Yes. The thing that I wanted to say about this was that I think that when we're modeling this understanding and sensitivity, I do think we still need to work as a board on how we're reviewing the policy impacts, because I think we're thinking more on from a lens of like, how are people training and what's in the curriculum, and not really looking at our policy impacts in the same way. And so I know that the board has made a commitment to equity, and I really want to see how we're going to move forward in this upcoming year with reviewing policies and their impacts from the same lens, and the impacts it has for culturally, racial, and ethnic differences within the Corvallis community. So I just wanted to bring that into, like, as we're doing that, it's more than just about the trainings, and like how Sammy was saying about the data de-aggregation and the importance of that, and how do we communicate that and to our families and to people who are investing in our children in the community's educations. How do we communicate that and show that there are disparities within the system that are often swallowed up through statistics and policies? So I just wanted to add that in as how I can see us moving forward in this.
The one thing I would add is, you know, as you think about the roles of the board, it's about, you know, evaluating and hiring a superintendent. It's about adopting policy, and it's about approving a budget. And I think that that's another area that the equity work has shown up in terms of some of the professional development and some of the emphasis on staff ratios and discretionary ratios where they're needed the most. And so I think we've sort of honed in on policy and application in this conversation, but don't forget there's some other data points that you have that you've adopted or taken action around to try to move this work forward. So I just thought that it was an important piece to bring into that conversation.
Vince?
Sorry, I didn't hear the prompt. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, I just wanted to I have a note here that this is, you know, if anybody read the Ivan Lorenzen paper that Kristen sent out, both 62 and 63 here are highly correlated with student outcomes. That was found in that doing that, they did correlations. But anyway, I just wanted to emphasize that this is a very high value indicator for us. So the more we focus on this, we can expect that it's going to have tangible outcomes for students.
Absolutely. And I want to mention one of the things that I know that we've talked about before, and it strikes me every time I remember this and think about it, is that one of the key behaviors of any board that has a predictability factor on and an impact on student achievement is whether or not the board believes that all students can learn. That fundamental belief that all students can learn. And it sounds so easy, or like, but every board thinks that, right? But we know that's not true. We know that because we know there's a positive impact, there must also be a negative impact. But starting with that very basic belief of, do you believe that all students can learn? That alone has an impact on student outcomes. And I think that the nature of your conversation just reminded me of these very critical basic beliefs, that starting there, holding those, and then building on them through the work that you do individually and as a board is critical. And I think that question 63 really is somewhere along that continuum of starting with that belief and then going from there. Just waxing philosophical. But okay. Moving to the last one that I'm going to point out, and then I'm happy to open the conversation to, like I said, not in depth for everyone, but if there's something that we missed, because the last thing that I want you to do with this, and if it's not tonight, that's fine, because I know that you are maybe all getting close to screen fatigue. But at some point, what I'd like you to do is set a goal for yourselves on at least one, on something that you will do with this information. And this is different than overall district goals, right? This is, what will the board do for its own professional development or its own growth in this next year to address something, if not a couple things in here. But again, and I like came with some suggestions, and I've been taking notes throughout. So, and you all will have your own ideas. But for the last one that I'm going to point out to you, we'll move to page 25 and look at question 66, which I think had some foreshadowing earlier on tonight. Question 66 is, ensure the public is well informed of the board's roles and responsibilities. And this had the most nevers. And I've maybe said this to your board. I say it to most boards. The public does not know what you do. And before you got on the board, you didn't know what the board did either, right? I mean, who knows what a board does? Nobody knows what boards do. People think of boards or board members like they think of individual legislators. In my experience, which is anecdotal, but as I have traveled the state and learned how boards interact with their communities, people think that you can run on your individual platform with your own agenda, and you can advance that agenda through the board and take individual action, which you all know you cannot do. You are much more limited in your scope as an individual. You are effective as a whole board. And I know this board is very cohesive, and I know you understand that very well. How that translates into what your public understands about your roles, that's different, right? And so one of the things that I have seen boards do with this is develop a plan embedded within other communication plans to their constituency about how are we going to educate them on what our abilities are and what are our restrictions, or what are our, where can we not make a decision? Here's what we do and don't do. And so before I let you discuss this, I'll say that sometimes this pops up in, if we have a strategic plan and it's either new or we have or we're retooling it, and we want to get the message out to the community either in like listening sessions or some sort of community meeting, let's embed sort of a board 101 into that. So given that communication with the community was one of the things that you talked about earlier, if you set that as a goal, I wonder if this might be part of that, is also embedding, and what does a school board do? Because in my experience, it's really helpful when your families and your community know what you do. Because then they don't think when you fail to act as an individual because you can't, they don't feel like you're ignoring them or that you're dismissing them. They understand that the whole board only works when it's together. I will stop now and let you talk about this one. Jay has his hand up.
What hit me as you were talking would be if we were sharing better that information. That's a nice thing to do, but part of me says that the board needs to reach probably an agreement that education of children is shared responsibility, not only something done by schools, and you parents get to take shots at us and not have any responsibility. So it's kind of like, in doing any sort of communication, it would be good that the board is comfortable with and able to share who's got joint responsibility. Otherwise, I think giving them tons of information to shoot at and complain about and point out problems leaves the board pulling your hair out going, yeah, but if you had seen that child and the way he performed and didn't perform because of his level of responsibility. I think that's kind of my soapbox, but I think it's got to be part of the effective communication, or we're setting ourselves up for one-way critique.
Okay, thank you. Who else? I don't see any hands. Vince?
Ryan, who was the consultant that did our video for the bond? You remember that outfit?
Yeah, Jeremy Wright.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How much did he cost? Because I mean, a video like that
Mhm.
would be.
Oh, with the one that showed sort of like the it wasn't a cartoon, but it was sort of like a molded, yeah.
It was like a cartoon infomercial thing.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And just package the information perfectly. It would be great if we could just have that on the website. And then you push it out. And then when someone, is angry with the board and they're trying to find the school board or their email, before they find it, they have to watch the video. I'm getting kind of silly now, but I mean, but something like that might be nice. When we have excess revenue, we can do that.
Yeah.
Excess revenue. Lou.
Unmute. This is one of the areas that I'm like really excited for us to do some work around, because people don't know what we do, what to come to us with, how to approach the board. And I think it leads to a lot of frustration. So I get what Jay is saying about like having like this also shared responsibility, but in all honesty as well, the people elected most of the board to these positions to help represent the community well. And so some of that responsibility on us comes with being able to answer the hard questions and tough questions and engage in conversations that people are bringing, because if they weren't bringing them, they wouldn't be caring. They're coming from a place of care, and sometimes people don't know the appropriate way to bring that, like, what are we able to talk about and address. And so I think we have a lot of potential to help the public understand us a lot better and how to even engage with us. So I'm looking forward to working on this next year, hopefully, like in the next school year is what I mean, and how to make us more accessible. Right now, I don't feel like we're very accessible at all to the public, and only to a small select few who understand what a school board is, or even that they can approach us. And so yeah, that's kind of my little rant about that. Like, I think we need to do a lot of work, and I'm also excited to do that work with the community and to engage in tough conversations. Yeah, I also had more, but like you said, the screen fatigue.
is a real thing. Let's see, Sarah?
Yeah, I think this is a place where we could be more effective in what we do if people understand what we do. Um, and yeah, I think there are opportunities for outreach like at the beginning of the school year, when they're back to school opportunities, when they're at individual schools to and not at PTA meetings, but at meetings where you're going to have a broader range of families attending. I also, Vince's idea, I don't want to hire a video company to do that. We have these great, video productions CTE classes that, someday when they can get back in their studios, that seems like a great project for kids to figure out what the school board does and make a video for us. So, we have resources among our students that could probably help us with this kind of thing too.
Thank you, Lou.
Thanks. I remembered what it was. It was that if people, parents and public knew how to approach us and what to bring to us, I think it would decrease the level of frustration that they have too, and help us get through some things together a little bit more smoothly if they had that understanding. It was a little bit more clear. That was the last thing I totally, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So that's the last thing that I want, as I analyzed that. Oh, Vince?
Well, I mean, since you're winding down, and that's fine. It's just that when I went through and looked at all the things that we rated lower on, but there was a lot of things that we rated ourselves very high. But if there was deficiency, I pulled those out, and the preponderance of those, even if they weren't in standard 5, the preponderance of them were related to communications in some way. And I think that is just a key area for the board, that we are just very, very insular, both, with the public, with our partner organizations, with our own staff. We're just very, very insulated. And I have tons of notes here that, we can't possibly go through, but I think it's an area that this is our premier area where we really need to work, is on how we communicate and how we, participate publicly with the district.
And that was going to be my next question to you, is what do you want to do with this information? Like, what are the patterns that you saw? What are the other, like I said, I pointed out individual indicators that I wanted to bring to your attention. But this is your report. So, what else you saw and what you want to do with it, Ryan?
One thing I would mention to the board as you think about this is that I've also sort of witnessed over time when there have been decisions that the board's had to make that haven't always been popular with the community, that the response is that we haven't communicated or we haven't heard that group of constituents, when really we've listened, took that into advisement, and then the board's taken action. And so I always just want to caution the board in that dynamic. One I can think of is when we were talking about a position around sustainability, and we didn't initially start by adding that position. And during the budget process, people felt like they weren't heard. Down the road, we were able to add that position. But back when we first said no, it wasn't because we weren't listening. It was more that we weren't in a position yet to bring that position on. So I think it's just a sort of a cautionary note about how you communicate is also often the critique, even when you are communicating.
And that brings up such an important point. What does it mean to be heard? And sometimes this happens within boards, and sometimes this happens between boards and community groups, where, like, when we are creating systems for folks to give input, what does it, there are times where a group may feel like because you didn't take their recommendation, they were not heard. But is that because you also have an option to go another way, or because you literally did not consider their input in making your decision? And there's a difference, right? I mean, and I do a lot of this work with boards themselves, where, you know, a board member is like, you never listen to me, I'm never heard. And we have to start with, what does it mean to be heard? What is your expectation when somebody hears you? Is the expectation that you do what they say, or that you feel reassured and you have evidence or something that makes you feel like your viewpoint was taken into consideration? And so I think that, you know, if you do create a goal about communication and outreach with the community and what's appropriate for the board to do, it's also really important to not necessarily, I'm gonna say this term and I don't mean it the way it sounds, but rules of engagement. Like, do you know what I mean by that? Like, you know, when we take your input, or we absolutely consider it, and we may make a decision that doesn't follow along with your specific recommendation to any group out there. And sometimes that relationship with the community really can either become much stronger when there's that understanding and trust, or can fracture when to be heard means to take our exact recommendation, or when the board doesn't follow up with, we took all of this input and then made this decision. I mean, it sounds like, and I'll let you talk about this more, it sounds like that may be the direction you want to go with this information, is in developing a broader plan to engage the community. Jay, you've got your hand up.
It sort of fits, but it might switch off too. I think we had a pretty good lesson in listening, but understanding that we have lots of things to weigh, not just those who can speak at a given night when we talk about boundaries. I mean, boundaries are going to prompt a certain group of people to be very vocal, and the rest of the people are going to assume that we're going to do the right thing for the whole district. So it's a great example. And so if you're saying we need to work on some rules for engagement, which would be reminding ourselves what our jobs are and how we have to do it, I think that's a good one. Could I jump to another area that I don't know whether it's the right one or not, but it's an idea that when I was walking through this, my own experience in the world of schools was that unbelievably big success happens when you hire really good teachers and really good administrators, and you evaluate and help those who aren't very good get better or leave. And I'm not sure that would be an area that I would like to become more confident about what we're doing, so that I can, you know, defend that to the community. But also it's just something that's fundamental. And I guess it comes back to that question of, are we doing operational, you know, micromanagement, or are we asking for some education of what is our process? You all have heard of the, you know, passing the lemon teachers from school to school to school. Well, you know, if some parent came up to me and said, Jay, how does that work? Well, I would say from days back gone, long time ago, maybe a little bit, but I couldn't say what are our guiding rules and principles that we can help our kids be assured that they've got red hot teachers, and by red hot I mean, and we the survey asked for highly qualified. That's a great word, except what does that mean to Ryan and his principals and to the board? So that would be just another area that I think may be more about getting information and feeling comfortable with than adopting a policy on. So.
Any other thoughts about, it's funny, even through this medium, I can feel the energy draining out of our rooms. I'm getting very good at this distance thing. So I don't want to push you past your capacity. I really don't, because this is an important conversation, and what you do with it next is important. And so what I would want to get from you though is a commitment to what you want to do next, so that there is an action step going forward. Not to necessarily wordsmith a goal tonight, but either that we take a little bit of our next session, which is last, and I can send you the notes that I have taken as far as what you've said are the big areas, and we can start there. Or that you're like, no, we want to do this on our own, Kristen. We don't have time for this next time. You can do that. But something that where you can commit to using this information to set a goal or two for yourself next time. How do you want to go? What do you want to do next? Vince has his hand up.
Yeah, I raised my hand just to say at this point, I just would like to commit. I mean, I
Think
have
about
a whole bunch of
considering
things.
maybe.
I have a whole bunch of things that I would love to have us work on. There's at least 47 things here, but of course we're only going to do 2. So, but I don't think we can have that conversation tonight. So yeah, I would love to set aside time at a meeting very soon to have this conversation when we're all a lot more fresh and ready to haggle.
Fair. Let's see, Sammy.
So I would like to probably suggest a couple of things. Definitely, if we can review your notes, Kristen, that would be great. And if we could invite all board members, including, yeah, I'm not sure where it is coming from. All right.
Was it me?
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Can you start over? I missed the first part of that.
Yeah, I apologize. So, what I was saying is, I think one element of what steps we could take moving ahead is if we could review your notes, Kristen, about what you saw, or a summary of what you thoughts from what we had in this discussion as something salient that needs discussion. Maybe we can review that report. And probably in addition, and if all are okay, and I have Julie here 6 feet away from me with a question mark, if we could all send any comments, including the 47 points that Vince has, and we all share it with Julie. Julie forwards it to you. So probably we could have really good comprehensive follow-up that we could read before our next meeting. So that's one thought I have as a suggestion. Would you like us to see if that's a good idea first before I follow up with other suggestions?
I promise to pare mine down to 5 or less.
Sounds good.
I like or less. I always like or less.
So how about we do that as one thing? Another thing I'm thinking from reading this, and I don't want to jump the gun into one action we should do, but I think a theme that I'm seeing as very timely is public engagement and clarity about how we engage with the public is a salient element of what we are doing right now. And in a time like this time, a time of rapid changes, where the board probably need to examine critically its role in terms of supporting the superintendents and staff, responding to the urgent needs, and making sure community know who they should reach out to within staff and district, and be the advocate for that. Being able to celebrate the achievements, but also being able to listen to the community. I don't know what does it look like, but a public engagement 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago is completely different than today and the next 6 months or 2 years. And maybe that will redefine how we should operate that. So I think we should look into that lens as well in the discussion. Probably if we can reserve some time there. I know we have reserved some time for the health and wellness discussion and our stump speeches around that. How can we communicate to the community what we're working on that? So I want to make sure that we address both at the same time during the next meeting. Those are my thoughts and suggestions. I don't know what you all think.
Thoughts on that before we go to the next hand? Anybody have strong feelings? Yes, Ryan?
Just thinking about the topics that we have for upcoming meetings. I too would agree that the meeting that you're coming back for on May 21st would be a good time for us to solidify this. The only other meeting that we have with budget meetings coming up is on the 7th of May, and I have a couple topics I'd like to bring forward. So I think that what makes sense is to come back around to this conversation to get more specificity.
Lou?
I really appreciate what Sammy just brought up, and I'm in agreement with a lot of what he said, but also this is a lot of information and I really need time to process it. I appreciate the conversations about it because like reading it without the conversation, I feel like was missing a lot of context, and like this has been really helpful for me to think about how we can do things next year and think about how we perceive ourselves. And so I just appreciate this exercise and look forward to having conversations about what to do next with it, but I need processing time, so.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, I also am in a broad agreement with what Sammy said. I think to me, one of the themes that keeps coming up though is the communication, both of what we do and why we do it with the community. At the same time, at this crazy moment in time, I don't want to set a goal that creates work that takes away from the care that needs to be given to the education of our kids and making this distance learning work and making sure we're doing everything we can to meet the needs of all the members of our community. So I want us to be really cognizant of the time we're living in and make sure that that what we pick to do is meaningful and the work we're doing is meaningful and not just creating more work right now.
Absolutely. Vince?
Yeah, ditto what Sarah just said. Yeah, and so I'm really just want to get some nuts and bolts. So what we're going to do is we're going to process, and then we are going to be responding to some prompt that I believe will come from the board chair telling us to provide what we think should be priorities. And then we're going to have a discussion on the 21st of next month. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was thinking prompts about priorities or any takeaways from this conversation. So what do you take from this conversation in terms of thoughts? So whether it is items that you thought we should focus on, or the next goal or focus that we should do to really further our work. So it's really a little bit open-ended prompt that helps Kristen focus us to an action the next meeting. So if you really know this is the thing that we need to focus on, let's discuss question 66 and make sure we figure that out. That could be a response, or it could be some general takeaways that will help us further discussion.
Great, but we're going to get some correspondence from you saying submit your priorities, and that'll come in a couple weeks. Yes?
The prompt will come immediately after we finish this meeting.
Okay.
With that,
You may have to remind us.
okay.
So,
I know.
and Sam, one thing that I can do if this is helpful to your discussion before we get together next is, tomorrow I can type up a summary of what I heard from you all tonight with here are the big categories and themes that I heard you talk about with some bullet points underneath. Let me send that to you first.
Okay.
And then if you want to take that and send it, or you can all respond to me, like whatever makes your load lighter. Like I'm also happy to be the receptacle for those two questions. What did you take from this conversation, and what's the next thing to focus on? If you want to collect that, that's great. But if it helps you, if I collect that and then bring that to you in May, like I'm happy to do that.
So how about that, Kristen? Actually, if we're all okay with that, I'll wait until you give us the summary tomorrow,
Mhm.
and you provide the prompt, and I'll forward it to the board, and they reach out to you directly with their responses. So that saves time from me or Julie to be the.
Yes, I am more than happy to do that.
Thank you so much. Are we all okay with that?
Tomorrow. Everybody cool with that? Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's much better because reading your notes would be helpful as well.
Okay. So you'll get that from me tomorrow. Wonderful. Jay?
I just have a process question. Is it not okay for us to send material to you and then you to us before the meeting? That is, I think that one of the governance things is, does the board work thoughtfully? And if we wait till the board meeting to uncover what everyone else is thinking about, as in our top 3 or 4 things we want to move on, it's not thoughtful enough in my mind. I'd rather have if it's legal, if it's proper, I'd rather have you gather what people have said, send it to us ahead of the meeting, but tell me if that's not okay.
That's absolutely okay. You can receive anything you want from me.
Okay.
Anything I want you to have. You just can't discuss it amongst yourselves. So why don't we do this? I will send what I consider reasonable dates for you to have responses back to me so that I can compile them and send a compilation back to you so that you can be prepared. When do you want things for your next board? Like if our meeting is on the 21st of May, when would you want something? When is enough time?
Week before.
A week before? Okay. So I'll just back calendar from that and, probably ask you for a week to get things back to me. So yes, so Jay, I think that's a great point. I will make sure to have something to you so that you can look at it prior to our conversation and be prepared. So it's going to go from me to you and then you to me and then me back to you. Anything else?
I want to check in with Tina.
No, I'm good. Nothing else.
Wonderful.
Great. So I'll be back
I just
tomorrow.
wanted to
So you'll
say
be getting
thanks
first
for-
call. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Jay for that suggestion.
Yes, good.
Thank you. Okay, that's it. That's it for me. Thank you all. Still working with you and you persevering in this, despite the fact that you've got a ton going on right now. So
And you don't even have to drive home.
and the next, remember when I was with you last time, I had to drive to Klamath Falls the next morning. Like, I mean, I have a meeting with them coming up too, and it's fine. I can do anything the night before. Thank you all. Hope you all are well. Hope your families are well. Take good care of yourselves.
Well,
And you'll hear from me tomorrow.
thank you so much,
Kristen.
Kristen. I appreciate it. And
Thank
I really always it's always great to have you in our discussions, and you provide a really good depth to our conversations, and we
you.
enjoyed it a lot. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
So last item on our agenda is the board member comments. So if any board members has any comments you would like to share. Sarah?
Yeah. First, I want to send out a thanks again to our tech. Oh, am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay. You're just doing something I thought I wasn't on.
I was just,
to-
yeah, thank you to Kristen.
Yeah. To the tech team, I know this is a work in progress, but things got easier today. So they're doing a great job at a Herculean task. Also, I don't know if anybody else saw the article in the Oregonian today about the sort of losses in learning that are expected because of the shutdown. And I know we're all doing everything we can to keep that from happening, but we know it will happen. And there'll be disparities that we'll see because the situation that children are learning in. We talk about equitable, efficient, and effective learning environments. We have absolutely no control right now of what those environments are. So it's really hard to think about what's going to happen next year and the years after. But as I think about this whole situation, this is really a long-term thing we're looking at, because even if we could go back to school in September and it all looks normal, it's going to take a while to recover for students who, there's going to be academic gaps that are forming. There's going to be social and emotional gaps that are forming. And I don't have answers or what we can do about it. It's been one of the things that's been weighing on my mind for a while. And then seeing that article today just kind of brought it all to a head.
Lou?
Sarah, are you talking about losses of people, or what kind of losses are we talking?
Oh, it was talking about where there was 70% of the reading and writing learning that would have been anticipated in this year will be at sort of 70% of that. And with math, it'll be 50%. So we're seeing, just because of not being in school and not being able to replicate that same learning at home for our students, where they're going to come back to school next year is going to be, and then you have your summer slide, is going to be way behind where we would like them to be. And it's, potentially something that's going to take years, several years to recover from.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And that was what some of the stuff I was getting at our last meeting when I was asking how are we going to start preparing now for the students that are getting no passes. And even though the most recent information coming out says that they are still advanced in their grades and everything like that, there's still going to be some definite gaps, and they're going to be students that are from backgrounds that are less privileged than some and or that are already facing significant barriers. So thank you for bringing that up again. I really think we need to, as a district, really think about that heavily. And I know Ryan and Melissa and everybody, you all are already, and it's just the reality. And I think we need to, when we think about communication and stuff with the community, how can we talk about that openly as a district and as a board, saying yeah, this is going to happen and this is what's happening to address it, I think might be some important things that we can think about too, instead of it being expected that everything's going to just go back to how it was before, because it's not anywhere.
Thank you, Lou. Jay?
2 or 3 things. First of all, Lou, I'm really sorry about the wind chimes in the background. I worked with my student teachers to say, why don't you guys learn to teach other people about etiquette on these Zoom things? And then here I am. They're beautiful, but they're not helpful in meetings. But my other one is governance is absolutely a big deal to me. And I am really grateful that we're doing this work. It's the stuff that will help us send beyond years that we're here. I think good stuff. I think the third thing is that, and I don't just say this because he's sitting here, but it helps to be a good governing group when you have a strong superintendent. If you didn't, you could see some real disparities on, we don't know what we're doing, we don't have a plan, we don't get, and so Ryan, I appreciate you a lot, and I think it helps keep us in good ratings world. So thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Jay. Vince?
Yeah, I was going to bring up the Oregonian article as well, and thank you for highlighting that. The other aspect is during economic downturns or times of tumult, child abuse and domestic violence go up, and rates of those things. And those have real tangible effects on kiddos as well. So it's not just academics. I mean, our kids are going to come back to us and they're going to need help. We're going to have kids that maybe don't fit the demographics, the target demographics that may have been picking up ACEs while they were away. And we just need to be cognizant of that. And we have a lot of work to do. What keeps me up at night is this topic, but the generational effect. What I don't want to do is, 15 years from now, I don't want sociologists to be saying, oh, well, this strand of people were in school during COVID-19. So this is why we're seeing this, uh, change in access to social services, criminal behavior, that sort of thing. So I think if we're focusing on that, I think we can minimize that generational effect, hopefully.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Lou.
Thanks, Vince. That was the other thing I brought up last week too, was the kids that are in families that are in some violent situations. And I read another article recently that said that the reporting of child abuse has gone down like 70% since schools have been closed. So like seeing that number after we had that conversation last week really was really sad. And just remembering that there are kids in families that are being impacted by so many things, and just the expectation that schools be the ones who basically save them all is right. I feel like there's that community expectation that schools do everything, and it's just a lot. And so I appreciate you all recognizing this collectively as a board and as a district, because it's rough times for a lot of people and a lot of things outside of our immediate control. But the things we can think about is how we set students up next year or whenever they come back. Hopefully it's in the fall, honestly, but you never know. But just like, how do we set it up for that transition? And what can we do to keep them inspired in the meantime? And what does that communication look like with families? And maybe that's something we can think about as a board, like I said, is recognizing that we know this is happening and we wish we can do more. I don't know, I'm gonna start getting all emotional about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I didn't raise my hand. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Vince.
No, I just, and Ryan and Melissa, I could see the exhaustion on your faces. It's late, but I know as you're thinking about this, I mean, this is work that's going to, go beyond the school year. It's going to be this summer too. And so I'm thinking about how are we going to get our partners in the community together to, implement programming to support our kiddos. We'll have a better sense of which kiddos are succeeding, which aren't. And so be sure to tap us, we're your advocates, to help think about that and reach out to folks and circle the wagons on these kids.
Yeah, I want to second that exactly. That was what I was thinking about, is making sure we're working with partners and advocating for the things that we're doing. One thing that OSBA News talked with me immediately after our last meeting last week about the Student Success Act, if we have changed our plans accordingly. And what I said is that no, we are still thinking that, we still believe that the investments we're putting for the Student Success Act to fund are very important and critical. They're actually more important than ever because of the need and the demand for it. With that, we realize that the corporate activity taxes forecast is definitely will not be the same as we expect it to be, because many corporates and small businesses are struggling or not even in business. But the demand for the work that we're doing is really essential, and more essential than ever. And we need to figure out how can we advocate for it as board members and community leaders, to really highlight that need that we all spoke to, and the Oregonian article now is highlighting. And I think the emotional and health and wellness of our students will be a very important predictor of student success with these difficult times. So I hope that we can figure out good solutions that will work economically, but as education leaders, probably we need to just continue on this message that we care about our students while the school is not in session. Still, our students need the care and attention, and so they can succeed when they're back in the physical schools. Yes, go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, just one last thing, and I see on YouTube we still have 3 people watching. And this is a message I want to send down to staff, is that article from the Oregonian is really discouraging for teachers. And I just want to be crystal clear that me as a board member, and I think I speak for the board as a whole, we have complete faith in our educators, and we're just enthusiastic about the work that they're doing. I know my kids were really happy this week to see their teachers again and re-engage, and that's been really, really healthy. You know, I'm not a great teacher, and neither is my wife. But they're doing good work, and I don't want them to be discouraged, even though circumstances are bad. They're doing the best they can, and that's all they can do. They need to take care of themselves, and I just appreciate their work.
Yeah, absolutely. The ancient the profession of teaching is not limited to the traditional schools, and this week is a testament of that. So thank you for all of our educators who are doing the hard work from their homes, from their office rooms or the corners of their living rooms to continue the critical and essential work. And thank you very much for what you're doing. I think it's something that we're proud of, that we have dedicated educators who really care about our children. Tina, do you have anything that you would like to add or say?
I don't want to take up any more time just repeating what has already been said. So I just want to say that everything that I would have expressed has already been expressed, and thank you.
Thank you, Tina. All right, any other comments?
Melissa, do you have any updates that you'd like to share about the things that are happening right now with regards to health and wellness and operations or any of those aspects?
I think that all of what you've spoken about and our concerns about our kids and how they're going to come back, that what's weighing heaviest on us, and I think what's really hurting our teachers right now, is that they can't take care of the kids the way that they normally do. They don't have them in their classroom to check on them and to see how they're doing and take care of their emotional well-being. So reaching out to them through whatever means they are reaching out to them this week has been very critical for them. But we need to maintain that. And especially we're really hearing the message that the family that was great last week or even this week may not be that great next week. Things change quickly. People lose their jobs. Health shifts dramatically. And we need to always remember that care and community has to be first in this process for distance learning, and continuity of learning is after that. But care and community has to come first, and it doesn't stop. We can't get into that mindset that everyone's fine. So as far as what's going on, you're getting tons of updates. Technology was one of our big challenges this week, but we got that taken care of, and we can't wait to kind of keep moving forward. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Appreciate it. Anything else for the good of the order?
Just a couple of things. Again, I think that Melissa did a good job of describing where our teachers are right now and caring for their kids. At the same time, there's a couple of other things just to mention. So last week we got information about 12th graders and some of the expectations around graduations. We got some more information this week about 9th through 11th graders and the way that their system works around pass, no pass, and some of that information. So our teachers have been aligned with that and understanding that. I think we'll continue to have some support from ODE as they help us to make decisions about how to move forward. Conversations we are having right now are about things like high school graduation, what that's going to look like, to how do we bring 5-year-olds in as kindergartners, the elementary principals. We're talking about that today. So the transitions, how do we make those as strong as possible in these times? Are kids moving into middle school? Are kids moving into high school? all those logistics we're starting to think more and more about. And then also on a bright spot, we have filled Julie's position with Lindsay Kang, who's coming and joining us. So you probably saw that announcement. We're really excited to have Lindsay. It was a really incredible pool of candidates for the position. So we couldn't have gone wrong, honestly. But Lindsay is going to be phenomenal. She's coming to us from Austin, where she was working at the State School for the Deaf, working with the board there in a similar role. And so she comes with that experience and just completing a master's degree and wanting to move out to this part of the country. So we're really excited to have Lindsay, and she'll be starting shortly, and you'll get a chance to meet her at upcoming board meetings. So with that, I just want to say thanks for your work tonight and everything that you've continued to do to support the community as we shift and move through these times.
Thanks, Ryan. And for Lindsay, welcome aboard. Welcome to Corvallis, and welcome to Corvallis School District. And we'll be excited to working with you on the school board. Anything else for the good of the order? All right, seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have a wonderful night.
Good night.
Good night.